A few weeks ago, D.L. Mayfield, who's an author, activist, podcaster, she tweeted a question. She said, maybe you are an ex-evangelical, maybe you just really, really hate Christian nationalism. And it put into words something I've been thinking for a while now, that so many of the people I've known who have left Christianity did so because they recognized that the Christianity they were raised in was inseparably tied to some bigotry, be it racism, sexism, homophobia, patriarchy, or others. And that became too much for them to bear. Many of them would not have used the term Christian nationalism when they left Christianity, and they may not use it now, but Mayfield suggests that that's actually the reason they were leaving. And I'm inclined to agree. This further got me thinking about the ways in which that Christian nationalism is particularly white American-centered. One needs to go no further than the attacks on newly elected Georgian Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock than to see Christianity that doesn't center the white American identity denigrated as heretical. And that's been true for decades. The same attacks on Warnock are those that were leveled at Martin Luther King Jr. And, it's older than that too, isn't it? So for this episode of A Glass Can Only Spill What It Contains, I want to start working through the book that got me reading again after a very long break during the COVID-19 pandemic, where I just couldn't focus on reading. Grief will do that to you. The Idols of Death and the God of Life, a Theology. It's a collection of essays by Latin American liberation theologians. It's another group often condemned by white American Christians as heretical for being anti-American. I say start working through it because the 10 essays in the book were so affecting on me that I may have to talk about quite a few of them before we move on, and that will take more than one episode. We'll start this week with the first one. So one of the other things I do online is a podcast called Cinema Credo. It's been a while since I put out an episode, unfortunately. But in it, I talk to people about a film of religious significance to them. Now, religious significance is my term, but I let them define religion or significance however they like, which is why I've talked to a Christian monk about the last temptation of Christ, a agnostic who was raised Orthodox Jewish about Groundhog Day, and an evangelical raised Hinduish Christian about death to Smoochie. Religion is a broad term for the sake of the show, but I really mean it even more broadly, so my description is actually probably not accurate to the conversations I actually want to have. When I say religion, I mean the way we organize society. Religion is just one of the scaffolds we use to organize, to decide how to organize, and it is, to me, intrinsically tied to philosophy, sociology, politics, economics. They're all competitive and complementary frameworks of organization. I'm interested in all of those because they all serve interrelated functions. The first essay in Idols of Death is by the book's editor, Pablo Richard. He frames economics similarly, noting that the problem of the oppressed world is not atheism, but idolatry. In Richard's view, capitalism has atheism to fear because capitalism is religious, an idol worshipped in service of power. He says, quote, capitalism is terrorized by and obsessed with the problem of atheism. For this reason, economists, politicians, business executives, journalists, artists, professors, and others pursuing the limitless growth of capitalism are increasingly preoccupied with religion and theology. The economist Milton Friedman is also an eminent theologian. The political reasoning of North American presidents and of the Trilateral Commission is also religious and theological reasoning, end quote. The day I first read that paragraph, I also came across an article from the New York Times published August 28th, 2020, which speaks of divinity consultants who blend the obscure language of the sacred with the also obscure language of management consulting to provide clients with a range of spiritually inflected services, from architecture to employee training to ritual design. Their larger goal is to soften cruel capitalism, making space for the soul, and to encourage employees to ask if what they are doing is good in a higher sense. Now, it's easy to write that off as just weird, right? But it's no more weird than the synthesis of God and capital that framed American foreign policy for the last 100 years and caused many of the oppressive atrocities that led to the creation of liberation theology in America and Latin America. And it's the same ideas that have fueled Christian nationalism since the age of Constantine, what Frederick Douglass referred to as slaveholder religion, or Dr. Cornel West calls Constantinian Christianity, at odds with true prophetic Christianity. It's the scaffolding by which the society we live in is convinced to support empirical greed and oppression by being told it is supporting God. Or as Richard puts it, the often proclaimed secularization of modern life and the death of God have only served to uncover new ways to produce religious goods and to expand the market for the consumption of new theologies. Richard sets the tone for the entire book by framing capitalism as the titular idol of death, which he defines in his reading of the book of Exodus, particularly pointing out that the prohibition of idolatry within the Ten Commandments follows a reminder that Yahweh God is the liberator of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and it is because God promises liberation that we follow God. The golden calf is not a foreign god, as prohibited in the first commandment, or second, depending on your counting tradition, but a graven image, a separate sentence even if you don't consider it a separate commandment. Graven images, in Richard's reading, then are attempts to rein in God's promise of liberation by creating lesser Yahwehs, Yahwehs we, or our leaders, can control. He fleshes this out in the story of the golden calf in Exodus 32 and the golden calves, plural, in 1 Kings 12, as stories of Israel rejecting the God of liberation and seeking to return to the God they had worshipped in Egypt. They sought, quote, worship of a God that would console them in slavery, but not set them free. A boxed-in Yahweh. Boxed in indeed in the same way that organized religion as an opiate of the masses is used to box in the liberator God in systems of oppression throughout history, including today when Jeremiah Wright saying "God damn America," or Raphael Warnock calling for America to repent for its worship of whiteness is framed as heresy or anti-Christian. And indeed they are heretical, certainly, but not to Christianity, but to the idol of white Christian nationalism and racial capitalism that most American Christians follow. Indeed, as I record this, white American evangelicals are outside Capitol buildings around the country, going through a great disappointment as they try to force the apocalyptic theology they built around a president to produce a second coming. In the opening paragraphs of the essay, Richard says that in these times it is impossible to seek the God of Jesus Christ without coming directly face to face with the idols and fetishes of the dominant system. Christians can theologically analyze the question of God only from the political perspective that confronts the religious systems of modern capitalism. That is to say, Christianity must be political, and must be political in the face of, not in support of, the dominant powers of the oppression in our world, capitalism. Finishing the essay, he comes back to that idea and seeks to tie everything together while laying the groundwork for the rest of the book's pieces. He says, It is no accident that today the centrality and importance of the prohibition of idolatry have been discovered in Latin America. Idolatry is part of our deepest experience when we live, express, and communicate our faith in the God of Jesus Christ. In the present situation of extreme oppression in our continent, we live in a profoundly idolatrous world, economically, socially, politically, cultural, ideologically, and religiously. We live crushed under the idols of an oppressive and unjust system. To live the demands of faith in this context is not simply a pious or personal act. It necessarily entails a radical confrontation with that system. Idolatry is a question of politics and a question of faith. If capitalism were atheistic, it is possible that our faith would not have the subversive strength within a practice of political liberation. But capitalism is idolatrous rather than atheistic, which poses a political and theological problem at the same time. Wow.